Chapter 5 Dulce Domum. The shades of the short winter day were closing in on them, and they had still some distance to go. They plodded along steadily and silently, each of them thinking his own thoughts. The moles ran a good deal on supper, as it was pitch dark, and it was all a strange country to him as far as he knew, and he was following obediently in the wake of the rat, leaving the guidance entirely to him. As for the rat, he was walking a little way ahead, as his habit was, his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the straight gray road in front of him. So he did not notice poor Mole when suddenly the summons reached him and took him like an electric shock. We others, who have long lost the more subtle of the physical senses, have not even proper terms to express an animal's intercommunications with his surroundings, living or otherwise, and have only the word smell, for instance, to include the whole range of delicate thrills which murmur in the nose of the animal night and day, summoning, warning, inciting, repelling. It was one of these mysterious fairy calls from out of the void that suddenly reached Mole in the darkness, making him tingle through and through with its very familiar appeal, even while yet he could not clearly remember what it was. He stopped, dead in his tracks, his nose searching hither and thither in his efforts to recapture the fine filament, the telegraphic current that had so strongly moved him. A moment, and he had caught it again, and with it this time came recollection in fullest flood. Home. That was what they meant, those caressing appeals, those soft touches wafted through the air, those invisible little hands pulling and tugging all one way. Why, it must be quite close by him at that moment, his old home that he had hurriedly forsaken and never sought again that day when he first found the river. And now it was sending out its scouts and its messengers to capture him and bring him in. Now, with a rush of old memories, how clearly it stood up before him in the darkness, shabby indeed, and small and poorly furnished, and yet his, the home he had made for himself, the home he had been so happy to get back to after his day's work. The call was clear, the summons was plain. He must obey it instantly and go. "Ratty," he called, full of joyful excitement, "hold on! Come back! I want you quickly!" "Oh, come along, Mole, do," replied the rat cheerfully, still plodding along. "Please stop, Ratty," pleaded the poor Mole in anguish of heart. "You don't understand. It's my home, my old home. I've just come across the smell of it, and it's close by here, really quite close, and I must go to it. Ratty, please, please come back." The rat was by this time very far ahead, too far to hear clearly what the Mole was calling, too far to catch the sharp note of painful appeal in his voice. "Mole, we mustn't stop now, really," he called back. "We'll come for it tomorrow, whatever it is you've found. But we daren't stop now. It's late, and the snow's coming on again. So come on quick, there's a good fellow." And the rat pressed forward on his way without waiting for an answer. Poor Mole stood alone in the road, his heart torn asunder, and a big sob gathering somewhere low down inside him to leap up to the surface presently, he knew, in passionate escape. But even under such a test as this, his loyalty to his friend stood firm. Never for a moment did he dream of abandoning him. With a wrench that tore his very heartstrings, he set his face down the road and followed submissively in the track of the rat, while faint, thin little smells, still dogging his retreating nose, reproached him for his new friendship and his callous forgetfulness. With an effort he caught up to the unsuspecting rat, who began chattering cheerfully about what they would do when they got back, and how jolly a fire of logs in the parlor would be, never noticing his companion's silence and distressful state of mind. At last, however, when they had gone some considerable way further, he stopped and said kindly, "Look here, Mole, old chap, you seem dead tired. No talk left in you, and your feet dragging like lead. We'll sit down here for a minute and rest." The mole subsided forlornly on a tree stump, and tried to control himself, for he felt it surely coming. The sob he had fought with so long refused to be beaten. Up and up it forced its way to the air, and then another, and others thick and fast, till poor Mole at last gave up the struggle, and cried freely and helplessly and openly, now that he knew it was all over, and he had lost what he could hardly be said to have found. The rat, astonished and dismayed at the violence of Mole's paroxysm of grief, did not dare to speak for a while. At last he said very quietly and sympathetically, "What is it, old fellow? Whatever can be the matter?" "I know it's a shabby, dingy little place," Mole sobbed forth at last brokenly. "Not like your cozy quarters, or Toad's beautiful hall, or Badger's great house. But it was my own little home, and I was fond of it, and I went away and forgot all about it. And then I smelt it suddenly on the road when I called, and you wouldn't listen, Rat, and everything came back to me with a rush. And I wanted it, oh dear, and when you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, and I had to leave it, though I was smelling it all the time, I thought my heart would break. We might have just gone and had one look at it." The rat stared straight in front of him, saying nothing, only patting Mole gently on the shoulder. After a time he muttered gloomily, "I see it all now. What a pig I have been! A pig! That's me, just a pig, a plain pig!" Then he rose from his seat, and remarking carelessly, "Well, now, we'd really better be getting on, old chap," set off up the road again over the toilsome way they had come. "Wherever are you going to, Ratty?" cried the cheerful Mole, looking up in alarm. "We're going to find that home of yours, old fellow," replied the rat pleasantly, "so you had better come along, for it will take some finding, and we shall want your nose." "Oh, come back, Ratty, it's no good, I tell you. It's too late, and too dark, and the place is too far off, and the snow's coming. And I never meant to let you know I was feeling that way about it. It was all an accident and a mistake. And think of Riverbank and your supper." "Hang Riverbank and supper too," said the rat heartily. "I tell you I'm going to find this place now if I stay out all night. So cheer up, old chap, and take my arm, and we'll very soon be back there again." Still snuffling, pleading, and reluctant, Mole suffered himself to be dragged back along the road by his imperious companion, who, by a flow of cheerful talk and anecdote, endeavored to beguile his spirits back, and make the weary way seem shorter. When at last it seemed to the rat that they must be nearing that part of the road where the mole had been held up, he said, "Now, no more talking. Business. Use your nose, and give your mind to it." They moved on in silence for some little way, when suddenly the rat was conscious, through his arm that was linked in Mole's, of a faint sort of electric thrill that was passing down that animal's body. Instantly he disengaged himself, fell back a pace, and waited, all attention. Mole stood a moment rigid, while his uplifted nose, quivering slightly, felt the air. Then a short, quick run forward, a fault, a check, a try back, and then a slow, steady, confident advance. The rat, much excited, kept close to his heels as the mole, with something of the air of a sleepwalker, crossed a dry ditch, scrambled through a hedge, and nosed his way over a field open and trackless and bare in the faint starlight. Suddenly, without giving warning, he dived, but the rat was on the alert and promptly followed him down the tunnel to which his unerring nose had faithfully led him. It was close and airless, and the earthy smell was strong, and it seemed a long time to Rat ere the passage ended and he could stand erect and stretch and shake himself. The mole struck a match, and by its light the rat saw that they were standing in an open space, neatly swept and sanded underfoot, and directly facing them was Mole's little front door. Mole reached down a lantern from a nail on the wall and lit it, and the rat, looking round him, saw that they were in a sort of forecourt. A garden seat stood on one side of the door. On the walls hung wire baskets with ferns in them, alternating with brackets carrying plaster statuary, Garibaldi and the infant Samuel and Queen Victoria and other heroes of modern Italy. Mole's face beamed at the sight of all these objects so dear to him, and he hurried Rat through the door, lit a lamp in the hall, and took one glance round his old home. He saw the dust lying thick on everything, saw the cheerless, deserted look of the long-neglected house, and its narrow, meagre dimensions, its worn and shabby contents, and collapsed again on a hall chair, his nose to his paws. "Oh, Ratty," he cried dismally, "why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place on a night like this, when you might have been at Riverbank by this time, toasting your toes before a blazing fire, with all your own nice things about you?" The rat paid no heed to his doleful self-reproaches. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, and lighting lamps and candles and sticking them up everywhere. "What a capital little house this is," he called out cheerily. "So compact, so well planned. Everything here and everything in its place. We'll make a jolly night of it. The first thing we want is a good fire. I'll see to that. I always know where to find things. So this is the parlor. Splendid! Your own idea, those little sleeping bunks in the wall? Capital! Now, I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get a duster, Mole, and try and smarten things up a bit. Bustle about, old chap. What a fellow you are for giving in. Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser, quite distinctly, and everybody knows that means there are sardines about somewhere in the neighborhood. Rouse yourself. Pull yourself together." They went and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not so very depressing, after all, though of course it might have been better. A tin of sardines, a box of captain's biscuits, nearly full, and a German sausage encased in silver paper. "There's a banquet for you," observed the rat as he arranged the table. "I know some animals who would give their ears to be sitting down to supper with us tonight." The rat had just got seriously to work with the sardine opener when sounds were heard from the forecourt without, sounds like the scuffling of small feet in the gravel and a confused murmur of tiny voices. "Now all in a line. Hold the lantern up a bit. Clear your throats first. No coughing after I say 1, 2, 3. Here, come on, we're all a-waiting." "What's up?" inquired the rat, pausing in his labors. "I think it must be the field mice," replied the mole with a touch of pride in his manner. "They go round carol-singing regularly at this time of the year. They're quite an institution in these parts." "Let's have a look at them," cried the rat, jumping up and running to the door. It was a pretty sight, and a seasonable one, that met their eyes when they flung the door open. In the forecourt, lit by the dim rays of a horn lantern, some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle, red worsted comforters round their throats, their forepaws thrust deep into their pockets, their feet jigging for warmth. With bright, beady eyes they glanced shyly at each other, sniggering a little, sniffling and applying coat sleeves a good deal. As the door opened, one of the elder ones that carried the lantern was just saying, "Now then, 1, 2, 3," and forthwith their shrill little voices uprose on the air, singing one of the old-time carols that their forefathers composed in fields that were fallow and held by frost, or when snow-bound in chimney corners, and handed down to be sung in the miry street to lamp-lit windows at Yule-time. "Very well sung, boys," cried the Rat heartily. "And now come along in, all of you, and warm yourselves by the fire, and have something hot." "Yes, come along, field mice," cried the Mole eagerly. "This is quite like old times. Pull up that settle to the fire. Now you just wait a minute while we— Oh, Ratty," he cried in despair, "whatever are we doing? We've nothing to give them." "You leave all that to me," said the masterful Rat. "Here, you with the lantern, come over this way. I want to talk to you. Now tell me, are there any shops open at this hour of the night?" "Why, certainly, sir," replied the field mouse respectfully. "At this time of the year our shops keep open to all sorts of hours." "Then look here," said the Rat. "You go off at once, you and your lantern, and you get me—" Here much muttered conversation ensued, and the Mole only heard bits of it. Finally there was a chink of coin passing from paw to paw. The field mouse was provided with an ample basket for his purchases, and off he hurried, he and his lantern. The rest of the field mice, perched in a row on the settle, their small legs swinging, gave themselves up to enjoyment of the fire. "They act plays, too, these fellows," the Mole explained to the Rat. "Make them up all by themselves and act them afterwards. And very well they do it, too. They gave us a capital one last year about a field mouse who was captured at sea by a Barbary corsair and made to row in a galley, and when he escaped and got home again his lady-love had gone into a convent. Here, you were in it, I remember. Get up and recite a bit." The field mouse addressed got up on his legs, giggled shyly, looked round the room, and remained absolutely tongue-tied. His comrades cheered him on, Mole coaxed and encouraged him, and the Rat went so far as to take him by the shoulders and shake him. But nothing could overcome his stage fright. They were all busily engaged on him, when the latch clicked, the door opened, and the field mouse with the lantern reappeared, staggering under the weight of his basket. Under the generalship of Rat, everybody was set to do something or to fetch something. In a very few minutes supper was ready, and Mole, as he took the head of the table in a sort of a dream, saw his little friends' faces brighten and beam as they fell to without delay, and then let himself loose, for he was famished indeed, thinking what a happy homecoming this had turned out after all. The field mice clattered off at last, very grateful and showering wishes of the season, with their jacket pockets stuffed with remembrances for the small brothers and sisters at home. The Rat, with a tremendous yawn, said, "Mole, old chap, I'm ready to drop. Sleepy is simply not the word. What a ripping little house this is, everything so handy." He clambered into his bunk and rolled himself well up in the blankets, and slumber gathered him forthwith. The weary Mole also was glad to turn in without delay, and soon had his head on his pillow in great joy and contentment. But ere he closed his eyes, he let them wander round his old room, mellow in the glow of the firelight that played or rested on familiar and friendly things which had long been unconsciously a part of him. He saw clearly how plain and simple it all was, but clearly, too, how much it all meant to him, and the special value of some such anchorage in one's existence. He did not at all want to abandon the new life and its splendid spaces, to turn his back on sun and air and all they offered him. He knew he must return to the larger stage, but it was good to think he had this to come back to, this place which was all his own, these things which were so glad to see him again and could always be counted upon for the same simple welcome.